Hello, coders. Welcome to episode 214 of the How to Code Well podcast. Apologies about that abrupt start. I pressed the wrong button. It is Monday, the 20th of January. I haven't had enough coffee today. Monday the 20th of January, 2025. We're going to talk about strategic software architecture today. That is the topic of today's podcast, because last week I was talking about how one can get confused with different architectures. I certainly get all sorts of confusion around the various different architectures, the different types of architectures, the difference between architecture and design, software design versus software architecture, all of that crazy stuff. And I want to pull those things apart in the coming episodes. So today I want to focus on the strategic elements of software architecture. But before we do that, I'm going to I don't have access to the browser, unfortunately, so I will just have to talk you through it. So we have the January sale on at the howtocodewell.net site, and this has all of the courses are $5 until the end of January. And so we've got the PHP login from scratch course, which is a course that has 11 tutorials. There's no frameworks involved, but there are things like PHP stand, PHP unit, I think PHP mess is in there, mess detection. Anyway, it teaches how to build an application from scratch in a PHP project kind of way, using composer packages, but no frameworks, and it teaches you how to use PHP sessions. The next one is PHP and PHP MySQLi. That is one that is up to be renewed because obviously people use PDO these days, as rightly they should. Then we've got PHP control structures. There is a 15 tutorial course on Linux Bash for beginners. There is a Docker for beginners course for anybody who wants to learn Docker. That has 11 tutorials in there. There's PHP control line interface basics. There's PHP strings for beginners. There's a HTML for beginners course as well. And I have plans for future PHP courses coming up the road. Last week, as I mentioned in a couple of episodes ago, what we're doing is we're pushing out a tutorial every week. And at the moment, I'm focusing on Laravel. After a couple of weeks, I will move to Symfony, and I have 24 tutorials lined up. These are all scheduled. These are all produced. They're edited. They're written. They are ready to go. They are available for Patreons. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Available for the Patreons as well as YouTube members. And you can access those tutorials now. There's 24 of them. Some of them are Laravel, some of them are Symfony, and I essentially want to get to basically a year's worth of backlog, which I can schedule up, offer those to the Patreons, offer those to the members, and obviously when you view them in early access, you get to comment on the thing and help improve and support the show going forward. Last week, we've pushed out 2 already. There is 24 yet to be pushed out, but the first 2 was a tutorial on Laravel middleware and essentially what is middleware in Laravel, and then the one last week was how to alter the requests in Laravel middleware before they actually get to the controller. So that's pretty awesome. And there's going to be some more Laravel coming up, and then, as I was mentioned, there is going to be some Symfony stuff too. And that's pretty much it in terms of the updated stuff for How to Code Well. Things are getting very busy at the minute, but I'm so glad that we have this catalog of tutorials that I can release once every week. And of course, the podcast that goes on at 5:30 every Monday. There are 2 links that I would like to show, love to have shown you. However, the browser isn't on OBS at the moment, unfortunately. One is from a repository that I discovered quite recently, and it's a DigitalOcean PHP client. Now, they have their own client, right? DigitalOcean have their own PHP client for spinning up droplets using PHP. But there is one by Graham Campbell, which is an integration of that using Laravel, which I think is pretty cool. I wish I could show you on the screen, but I'll provide you links. There is all sorts of things to do with creating, powering on droplets, getting the droplets via their IDs, establishing connections. So if you're ever using droplets in DigitalOcean, if you're using a Laravel application, then I highly recommend taking a look at this. I'll leave links in the show notes below. So if you want to orchestrate and manage that's a lovely word, isn't it? Orchestrate. If you want to orchestrate and manage your DigitalOcean droplets through PHP and you're using Laravel, then please do check out this. I can see this being quite beneficial if you're building some form of command line application that you need to spin up a droplet to do certain things and then perhaps power them down afterwards. That would be pretty useful. And I had another link which I cannot find. Yes, another thing related to console scripts, but not related to Symfony. This is something that I've used in the past, and it is really quite clever. This is the Symfony console input arguments and options. So again, I'll leave a link to the documentation of Symfony in the show notes below. You can configure your console script to have arguments, and you can set those arguments to be required, or you can set them to be optional. And these are like prompts, right? So if you had like a console script and it was asking the user, as in yourself, a series of questions, you could then answer those questions in the command line, and then it would use those answers as variables. This is incredibly useful if you're setting up an environment and you need to, pass in some credentials or your email address, or select various things. Like, for example, if there is an option of choosing certain translations or choosing certain files or assets, you could list those, and then you could use the arrow keys to select them, and then you would press enter, and then that would move the command on to the next process. It's very, very, very clever, and I've certainly used it in the past before. It's really good, because before this, trying to get prompts from your command line was a right pain in the ass. It's so painful to get the value that the user is entering, because you would have to check for various different patterns for various different values. But in this case, you can do it really relatively smoothly using the console input arguments and options. And the difference between the argument and the option is that an argument could be a single argument, right? Whereas an option could be a series of options that you provide. It can work on arrays. It can, as I said, deal with required and optional values. And it's a really great way of having some form of help text as well, because you can use your console help to get help on a console command. It will list those arguments and those options with some help text as well. So that's all built in, and it's really, really good. Really recommend people looking at the Symfony console stuff if you're ever doing any command line work. That is so good, so good. Anyway, let's get into the crux of this, and that is the software architecture. Okay, so I want to talk about software architecture over the coming weeks in the coming episodes of the podcast, because I think it's super important for people to understand what architecture actually means and the distinction between architecture the various different types of architecture in the things that we do, as well as the various different design patterns that we do as well. And I'm constantly learning. So if there's anything that I say that is wrong, then please do jump on the comments and let me know. And the thing about architecture, the reason why I want to dig into it is because there isn't really a set guideline as to what architecture actually is and where the boundaries of architecture are end and start, because you can look at it from various different levels of abstraction, and you can talk about software architecture in a very confined space, or in a space that is quite broad and quite global to the system. So I wrote a couple of things that I want to discuss, and again, if you have any disagreements or if you want to add anything to this, then please do let me know. So here we go. Software architecture. This is going to be an episode about software architecture. Software architecture explains the structure of a system. Think of it like a blueprint of a house or a skeleton of the human body. Each of these are maps of the highest abstraction. The blueprint of a house will show you the boundaries of the building, where the doors and the windows are to be placed. A skeleton of a human body will tell you the age, the sex, and the height of the person. These are maps that have well-defined rules that explain the what and the where, but they don't describe the how. Okay? So a blueprint does not offer any suggestions as to how the construction methods are to be used to build the doors. Okay, it may offer a suggestion as to the direction the doors must open, but they don't go into any detail about the color of the doors or what key is required and what lock is needed. Okay, think of this like the distinction between design patterns and architecture. This is kind of the route I'm kind of going into. All right. Examining a skeleton will offer you insights into the person's age, but without any other contextual knowledge, the skeleton will not give you any clues as to the type of job that was performed by that person and how they went about their day-to-day routines, right? So yeah, I mean, you could have a look at the skeleton and the things that are around the skeleton, right? Like the tools and whatnot, but the actual skeleton itself, it's not going to tell you how that person performed tasks. Okay, the difference, the key words here are the what and the where versus the how. So with software architecture, the way I was taught was that software architecture, you've got to think about the what and the where. All right, so it's like a blueprint. So what is it that this blueprint is describing? Where are these doors? Where are these windows? And how many rooms have you got? But you don't talk about what is the color of the wallpaper, or what is the mechanism of the lock of the door, okay, or what is the color of the carpet. You don't talk about that. They're not the boundaries of the architecture, they are the boundaries of the design. So when we talk about software design patterns, that's where we start playing around with the how it works, not what is working and where it's working, right? So software architecture is more abstract than the design of software in that sense. So when it comes to a software architecture, when it comes to software, the architecture describes the bigger picture and is not limited to just the software itself. So this is key. So the architecture will also define the scope of the software, the methodologies such as waterfall or agile that are used, as well as the choice of frameworks and the programming language that is required. So it goes beyond the software itself. We're now talking about the methodologies. We're talking about how the team actually work together, the sprints, the agile versus the waterfall, the ceremonies that are involved with that. All of that gets bundled into the software architecture because we're talking about the what and the where rather than the how, because we're talking about what architecture we're going to be using, where are we going to be using that. So like what ceremonies are we going to use? What programming language are we going to use? What framework are we going to use? What policies we need to adhere to? What are the technical requirements that the software engineers need to understand before they get hired? All of that stuff is bundled in software architecture, rather than talking about, well, how is the PHP going to be used, and how are we going to be creating these? How is this going to work? Is it Sprint or is it Kanban? How are the methodologies going to be put in place, rather than the what and the where? Okay. So these decisions build a strategic approach to building the system. So when you talk about software architecture, think about the strategic decisions that you make when building software, rather than the quote unquote tactical decisions of the designing of the software. So a software architecture. So one thing that I've certainly seen in my career, and is typical of a lot of places, is that software architecture and software design often get very conflated together and muddled together. And you could argue that actually that's perfectly fine, but the bigger the system, the more people that are in place, the more, unfortunately, the more regulation, policies and procedures and processes need to be put in place, which means that there's more separation involved in the architecture versus the design. The reason why architecture and design often gets muddled together is because of perhaps the size of the project and the size of the team is too small, and to even warrant the separation between the two things, right? And so a software architect will have the same hat as someone who's designing the systems, right? And not be involved in perhaps the various different, are you using Sprint versus Kanban? They're probably not worried about that, because they're probably not even using it, because they probably don't even have enough people in their team to worry about those concerns. So a project may not have enough resources or budget. There could also be a lack of knowledge in the team. So they talking from experience here, I didn't appreciate the difference between architecture and design. I just thought that when you're designing when you're designing a piece of software, you're architecting it at the same time, whereas you're actually architecting it and then you design it, right? You architect the higher abstraction pieces, and then once you've got the foundations of that done, you then start building upon it, and you start building it's like a house. Once you've got the foundations down, you can then start building upon those foundations, and you can start designing those rooms. You can design the bedroom, you can design the kitchen, you can design the hallway. But until you actually have the boundaries, where are the doors, where are the rooms, where are the windows, where is the staircase? Once you have all of that in place, then you can start looking at the design of various things. And this is where I think a lot of people get confused, because, and especially me, is because sometimes when you design something, say a house, you want to actually break a wall to make things bigger. And so you're essentially in that way of thinking, you are re-architecting. And so if you get an architect into your house to, say, build you an extension, they're going to need to look at the previous architectural drawings, the previous blueprint, to see if their new architecture is compatible with your old architecture, and what needs to be changed, and what regulations they need to follow as well. Okay, so due to the above responsibilities of software architecture and software design, they're often blended together, but it is important to know the differences between the two. And I think I'm going to leave it there, because I would like in the next episode to talk about more to do with the design, because I think this is the design of the software is probably where a lot of people are more familiar with. Like, we can now start talking about the design patterns that are used in software, and the design patterns that I've used, the design patterns that I'm learning, and I can give you some more experience on those things. I haven't been a quote-unquote software architect in the high level stuff. I've mostly been, in comparison, a designer of patterns. So knowing the boundaries that I've been given, so I know it needs to be PHP, I know we're doing sprints and agile, and I know that it needs to run in this time frame, and I know those constraints. So now I'm going to build or design the solution to the bug ticket that I'm working on. And sometimes it could be, I don't know, MVC, ADR, it could be all sorts of different other, even granular design patterns, such as the command pattern, memento pattern, adapter pattern. All sorts of patterns are involved. And the thing that I really love about design patterns and software architecture is it's agnostic to the programming language as well as the programming framework that you're using, because you can use the design patterns in almost every programming language. You can transfer those skills from one programming language to another. And if you read a programming language and if you read code, you can identify what design patterns they are following, or trying to follow at least, based on the way in which the software is designed. So it's a whole different space of programming. Programming is not just syntax, it's also the design of the application. And that is, for me at least, incredibly fulfilling when I can actually say, yeah, this solution warrants this design, and I can see it working in the way it should be and in the way it's designed to be. Another thing that I quite enjoy is looking at a bug and going, well, it's a problem because it's been designed like this. And the problems that often we face as programmers is that the application has actually moved in and evolved, and perhaps the code hasn't evolved with it. So the thinking of perhaps the business has evolved. Maybe the architecture of the business, the software architecture, has altered, but the code hasn't. And maybe the designs need to adjust with the new architecture, the new way of thinking. Anyway, so that's what we're going to be talking about next week. We're going to cover a little bit more to do with design patterns, and I'll break things up a little bit more for you. But anyway, happy coding. Thank you ever so much for watching. Do check out the January sale on howtocodewell.net. And also, if you consider subscribing to the YouTube channel, that'll be awesome. As well as the YouTube membership and Patreon to support the show. You'll get the 24 tutorials that are available for early access. I have them all the way up until the end of May. So that's pretty awesome. Later on this week, I'm going to be starting on tutorials for June. That's mad. I'm at work nearly sort of over half a year now. That's pretty cool. So anyway, happy coding, everyone.